Hey everyone, welcome back. I wanted to get this video out a little bit sooner than I expected, but I had a couple of things that came up that needed my attention. That's for another time though. We're moving on to the next entry in the Zelda Marathon, and today we're taking a look at a beloved Game Boy classic with a fresh coat of modern paint.
So needless to say, Link to the Past was a massive success for the SNES, selling 6.5 million copies by 2004. A follow-up was more than likely intended, but before then, a side project began work at Nintendo R&D 4, now known as Nintendo EAD. Programmer Kazaki Morita created a Zelda-like game with one of the first development kits for the original Game Boy, and eventually other members of R&D 4 would begin working on the project after hours. It's like Chess Club. But it's not stupid. Soon after, Takashi Tezuka had asked permission to develop a handheld Zelda title, intended at first to be a port of A Link to the Past. It ended up growing into an original project being directed once again by Tezuka, with the story and script being written by Yoshiaki Koizumi and Kensuke Tanabe. Names you guys might be more familiar with concerning the Super Mario series, with Koizumi being a director for games like Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario Odyssey, and Tanabe being a producer for the later Paper Mario games. A majority of the team from the previous project came back to work on the game, and after a year and a half of development, Link's Awakening was released to the world in 1993 on the Game Boy. In 1998, there was an updated re-release for the Game Boy Color called The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX, adding new color graphics, Game Boy printer compatibility, and the initially exclusive color dungeon. The version I'll be looking at today is the 2019 HD remake, developed in partnership between Nintendo and Grezzo, who some may remember for their remakes of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on the 3DS. They also did a 3DS remake for Luigi's Mansion, and even made some original projects like Ever Oasis. Series producer Eiji Aonuma wanted to remake the game for modern audiences because of how hard it was to find an original copy in the current gaming market, and wanted to make it more accessible to old and new players alike. Now that's something I can respect. Aonuma up top. Now dab me up, boy.
I gotta commend the developers for even attempting to put Link to the Past on the Game Boy, and even though the project took a different turn and became something completely different in the end, the attempt is still admirable. I didn't get the chance to play the Game Boy original when I was growing up, and I never really had any interest in the game until the 2019 remake on the Nintendo Switch. But regardless, let's boot the game up and let's take a look at the tale of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening.
Much like Link to the Past, I'm getting most of these story bits from the Zelda fandom website that has a comprehensive version of the plot, with some added details from the Zelda Encyclopedia and Hyrule Historia. Link's Awakening is set sometime after the events of A Link to the Past. We begin the story with Link sailing out at sea. A strong storm is troubling our hero of legend, but before Link can get a grasp on the situation, the boat is struck by lightning and Link washes up on a beach, completely unconscious. Having the appropriate reaction when waking up in a stranger's home, Link learns that he is washed up on the mysterious Koholint Island and was rescued by this young girl named Marin. After getting his shield back from her father Terran, Link returns to the beach where he washed up and finds his sword. A mysterious owl lands near Link and informs him that if he wishes to escape the island, he needs to collect the instruments of the sirens in order to wake up the sleeping windfish. So, Link sets out on his journey to complete his one-man orchestra, meeting strange characters, defeating nightmare monsters in various dungeons, and helping all friendly people he comes upon during his quest. During this time, he begins to grow closer to Marin. It doesn't really feel like these two are madly in love, but I like to think of it more like a high school crush. Eventually, Link discovers through this mural that the entire island of Koholint and its inhabitants are all just a dream of the windfish, and if the ancient deity were to awaken, the island and its people would cease to exist. Well, that went from zero to fuck really quickly. Link ponders whether or not he should continue his quest, knowing full well that it would lead him to losing the people he's met. But let's be real, the only person he really cares about is Marin. Maybe Luigi. With more assistance from the owl and the other dwellers of Koholint, Link manages to collect all of the siren instruments and plays the Ballad of the Windfish in order to wake the damn thing up. However, it's soon revealed that the nightmares were behind keeping the windfish asleep, and make one final attempt to stop Link. The hero succeeds and the windfish is awakened, with the island slowly fading away from reality. Link watches from the wreckage of his ship as the windfish flies off to parts unknown. Thanks for the help, jackass! Immediately, Link's thoughts turn to Marin, who is implied to have managed to escape the dream as a seagull. Oh, you go, girl. I'm proud of you. And that's the story for Link's Awakening. I think it's okay overall, but I do have my share of issues. I don't think enough focus is put on the fact that the island is a dream of the windfish. I think maybe if the people of the village were to discover that they were part of the dream, getting to see their reactions might have made me think twice about awakening the windfish. And because the island is a dream of the windfish, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter.
There's no consequences.
Alright, there's consequences! It also doesn't help that Link doesn't really react to the things that are happening around him. Now don't get me wrong, when Link shows emotion, he shows emotion. Look at this face he makes when catching a fish. He is so fucking proud of himself. But when he's helping the people in the village, discovering the island's true nature, or even spending some one-on-one time with Marin, Link's just kinda sitting there like... Dude, you good? There's an entire civilization of people, animals, and other creatures here that won't exist come the Awakening, and I want to feel bad for them when the time comes, but I really don't feel anything for anyone aside from Marin. She's such a sweet person and does her best to help others who are in need. I already mentioned the sort of high school crush these two have going on, which ultimately doesn't really go anywhere, but the little moments you see of them spending time together are adorable. She even shows you her devious side if you take her to the grain game, and the end result is hilarious. I also don't think it helps that there's really no dominant villain in this story. The main offensive against Link is the Nightmares, and they want to stop him so they can control the Dream of the Windfish, and these guys are some of the biggest pushovers in the series. You fight the supposed leader of the Nightmares inside the egg on the mountain, but this guy pretty much shows up out of nowhere, and he was the only one to give me any sort of challenge. I think it would have made things more interesting if the Nightmares were trying to hinder Link's progress outside of the dungeons. I can't help but feel there was just a lot of missed potential for this story, and I understand this story was written for a Game Boy title in 1993, but they could have easily expanded on the story for the remake on the Switch. Aside from maybe a new NPC here or there, it's the same narrative, which leaves me a bit disappointed.
I understand that people don't play Zelda games for story, but I at least want something engaging and interesting there in order to keep my interest piqued and keep me motivated in order to finish the adventure. But I'm going to be perfectly honest, I finished this game out of obligation for the review, and not because the story or even the game itself kept me motivated to do so.
Let's get into the game itself so I can better explain. In terms of what Link can do, he can do pretty much everything he could do in A Link to the Past. He does feel a little slow though, and I'm not sure if that's just because of the world he's in or if he's just kinda sluggish. Link can now press a button to block attacks and projectiles with his shield as opposed to it just blocking projectiles in A Link to the Past. It feels really good using the shield in this game, and when you block an enemy's attack to catch them off guard and take them out, it's so damn satisfying. Link's inventory also isn't as expansive as previously, but he still has the more iconic items of his repertoire such as the bow, bombs, the Pegasus boots, and the hookshot. What the fuck? There's no magic cape, no hammer, no canes, or even the medallions. Bottles were added to the remake, but you can only put fairies inside. There aren't any potions in the game, which I'm a little bummed out by, but at the same time, I only ever really used fairies 1 or 2 times inside of dungeons to heal myself, and maybe 2 encounters with nightmares. Fairies won't even revive you upon death. Instead, you can hold 1 batch of this reviving cream, which essentially does the same thing. I don't think Link is that old to where he needs to constantly apply arthritis cream to keep himself alive, but he swings the sword around a lot, so maybe he does need it. Link now has a second button that you can equip items to, so now you can do things like plop down a bomb and take care of an enemy with a bow and not have to switch. However, I still found myself constantly switching items out just like A Link to the Past, but more on that later. More improvements have been made to the map this time around. You don't have the whole map available to you when you boot up a new file, but once you enter an area for the first time, that whole part of the map will appear in full detail, and you can even use these markers like in Breath of the Wild to mark areas of interest for later. So yeah, we're not in Hyrule anymore, and there's no second world to explore either, but I'm okay with that. Koholint Island is a bit smaller than Hyrule, and while it still has landmarks sprinkled out around, they aren't as recognizable as previously, which I think could lead to players getting more lost than last time. There are also a lot of fucking bushes and tall grass sprinkled throughout the island and make some areas blend in together for me. They should have called the game The Legend of Zelda Lawn Mowing Simulator. The game also isn't anywhere near as non-linear as Link to the Past, since not only do you have the owl telling you your next objective every time you breathe, but you also have to complete dungeons in order this time. If you remember what I said for A Link to the Past, the dungeons in that game could be completed in almost any order you wanted, and while there were still some dungeons you needed to complete to get certain items, most of them could be completed with your base equipment from the Light World. I thought that helped the game in the long run in terms of replayability. In Link's Awakening, however, every item you get is not only used to open new areas of the island, but are heavily used inside of dungeons themselves. I don't need to have a non-linear dungeon order in order to enjoy a Zelda game, but I really liked the freedom given to me previously. Despite being smaller than Hyrule, there's still plenty of stuff for you to do on your quest. One of the first things you can do is start this decently long trading side quest, which I don't mind too much, except for the fact that you need to get enough items traded in order to progress through the main story. There are a few different mini-games for you to try out, like the Rapids Raid and Rapids Race, which makes a hookshot really fun to use. There's also the Crane game, which sucks! And there's also fishing, which also sucks! Never in my life did I think I would be more frustrated than by trying to catch a fucking cheap. Come on, baby, come on. Oh, fuck! Leave me alone, I just want my bottle. Heart pieces are back, but the remake almost tripled the amount in comparison to the Game Boy original. There's 32 of these sons of bitches now, as opposed to Link to the Past 24, and the original version's 12. You can also collect these seashells to net certain awards for collecting enough of them. These have also been increased from 26 to 50. You don't need to collect all the shells unless you want to do absolutely everything in the game, so don't be too worried. I'm not gonna lie, while I do somewhat appreciate the increase for heart pieces, you know, having more hearts makes the game a bit easier, having both more of those and the seashells just ends up feeling like a bunch of busy work to make the game longer. A lot of the locations you find these in, mostly with the seashells, makes me feel like I really have to go out of my way in order to find them. I will say it is worth it to go after the shells, since you get the Koholint sword after getting enough of them. There are plenty of teleportation spaces spread around across the map to make backtracking less frustrating, and eventually you can use a teleportation song on your ocarina to warp yourself around the map. During the downtime between dungeons, you're usually looking for a key or specific item in order to get to or enter the dungeon. It's not too bad, you know, you walk through a forest here, get some leaves here, murder moblins to save a chain chomp here, kill innocents that had nothing to do with the kidnapping here.
I have become death.
Sometimes you'll be doing stuff like climbing up a mountain, waking up a walrus, or even putting a ghost soul to rest. I thought I wasn't playing Majora's Mask yet, goddammit. It's not intrusive by any means, but sometimes it just feels like there are too many steps before starting the dungeons, and in some cases it can slightly bog down on the game's pacing. Speaking of dungeons, they're back again, and this time around I'd say they're kind of a mix between Zelda 1 and Zelda 3's dungeons. Most rooms and dungeons take up the entire screen like in Zelda 1, but you still get the bigger rooms like previously. Honestly, having most rooms in the dungeon take up one screen at a time makes these dungeons feel a lot smaller than they actually are. There are some new elements introduced in these dungeons. Within certain chests you can find these iron beaks that you can place inside of owl statues to receive clues on how to defeat certain bosses and solve puzzles, which I really appreciate. They can be a bit cryptic sometimes, but not as cryptic as say, Dodongo dislikes smoke or grumble grumble. Collecting the compass has a bit more importance this time around, since the compass will play a little jingle when you are inside of a room with a key you need to collect. That's an awesome addition. Some staircases will also lead you into these 2D sections just like Zelda 1. These rooms are harmless and are kind of fun to traverse. Most of the items from dungeons are some you may recognize from A Link to the Past, and there's really only one brand new item, that being the Rock Feather, which allows Link to jump over pits. I mentioned earlier that despite having a second button for items and a smaller inventory, I found myself changing out items as much as previously, if not even more. A change that the remake of Link's Awakening introduces is having some upgrades on separate buttons, like having the power bracelet being context sensitive, or the mirror shield and Pegasus boots having their own button, you know, like Link to the Past. That change was not made to the Rock Feather, so unless you want to constantly open the menu to equip and de-equip the item every time you have to jump, just go ahead and leave the feather on the X button slot. I also wish the game had some sort of quick select for dungeon items like Link Between Worlds did. Maybe I'm just spoiled by the modern remakes for the future games that give you more buttons for items, but it just felt so sluggish going into the menu and changing out items this time around. I will say that I do appreciate Link's Awakening having sections that more than often use all of your items you've collected, which makes the items feel that much more important when you collect them, even if I'm constantly switching items out. There are a lot more rooms where you need to defeat enemies in order to progress, and each dungeon has its own unique mini-boss around halfway through. A series first, I want to say. Most of the enemies return from Link to the Past, but there's still plenty of new enemies that are introduced, like these mice-looking guys, these devil-looking thingies, the color zombies, wait, what? Yeah, there are also some non-Zelda enemies introduced here, mostly from the Mario series. There's piranha plants, chain chomps, pokies, spinies, shy guys, boob buddies. It's a Goombas! Oh wow, they actually brought Wart back from the dead. I do think that the dungeons don't really meet that nice middle ground of being brain-taxing enough, but still being relatively comfortable to travel through. The dungeons early on are pretty damn easy, all things considered, even more so than I'd say the first 4 dungeons in the last game. The middle dungeons are just kind of bland to me, I don't really remember them as easily as others. The 2 exceptions for that are Eagle's Tower and Turtle Rock, both for the wrong reasons. Both of these dungeons are too damn long and too damn confusing for their own good. In Eagle's Tower, you need to constantly loop around a ton of rooms to use this cannonball to burst down the 4 support pillars of the dungeon so you can get on top and fight the boss. Sounds easy, right? Well, the plan was probably this. But execution is along the lines of... The mini-boss is also a pain in the ass because I could never get the pattern of these stupid fling things down. And then there's Turtle Rock. It's big, it's repetitive, it's slow, it's hot, it's repetitive, it's confusing, it's annoying. Did I mention it's repetitive yet? You got these slow-ass floor-making devices that takes forever to finish, and because it's technically the final dungeon, you fight so many of the game's previous mini-bosses in there. And these guys aren't winning any awards for best bosses anytime soon, especially the Dodongo worms. Riveting. Tail Cave, Bottle Grotto, and the Color Dungeon were cool, but again, they're simple in comparison to the first dungeons from the last game. I do think the Color Dungeon was probably my favorite because some of the puzzles that you had to do, and the boss was silly looking. I know my branding is blue, but I went for the red mail that increases your power, not knowing I get the Cajolan sword about 20 minutes later. Way to go, douchebag. Apart from maybe 2 or 3 of them, the bosses in this game are a complete joke. I mean, some of these guys have some cool ideas, but like I said, they're chumps. Completing dungeons this time around also gives you some things to do in the new Chamber Dungeon mode. Every once in a while you'll find these slab things that you can give to Dompe the Gravedigger, and he'll make them into these new chambers that you can use to make your own dungeons. Kind of. You don't actually get to create your own rooms and put together your own abomination, but rather you can use rooms from dungeons you've previously gone through to make a brand new layout. It's only limited to those one-screen rooms I mentioned earlier, in order to fit with this grid layout they have when you're arranging the dungeons. I will admit that the concept is novel. I think that it can have the same appeal as something like Super Mario Maker, but what makes that game so fun was the ability to create the entire level yourself. With the chamber dungeons, you're just mashing rooms together until you get something resembling a dungeon. I don't have as much attachment to making these as I do my own levels in Mario Maker. It also doesn't help that putting together a dungeon can take forever to figure out. Sometimes the layouts that Dompe wants you to put together can be really frustrating because the game doesn't tell you how linking rooms with staircases works, so more often than not, I had to scrap what I was working on just to get the staircases working right. It's also not enough to get the layout right. You have to complete the makeshift dungeon and defeat the boss at the end, and if you thought going through Turtle Rock was repetitive, you will never want to go through some of these rooms again with how often you'll be placing and going through them. The whole process got so exhausting to me, I just ended up placing the same easy early dungeon rooms and making each boss at the end Moldorm because you can kill them the quickest. I'm not happy about this genocide, believe me. This mode just left me kind of wondering what the point really was, since not only do you just get more heart pieces, more chamber slabs, and a bottle, but you can't share your layouts online at all. You can bring them to another console with Amiibo. Really? I didn't really bother doing anything because, as you can clearly see, I have no friends and I'm alone in my house. I would like them to expand on this for a possible true Zelda Maker in the future, but right now, it's not doing anything for me. I also found out after recording footage that the game also locks a full heart container behind this mode, so fuck you, Dompe. I will say this game looks gorgeous as hell. I think the plastic figurine look for the characters not only makes them look like faithful recreations of their original sprites, but gives them a sort of style that stands out from other Zelda titles. Characters are animated nicely and are also pretty damn expressive. Environments are constructed nice, visual effects are pretty, and the world is loaded with details. It's all great stuff. The biggest issue with Link's Awakening's presentation is its performance. The game runs at 60 frames per second, but whenever you walk into a new area, the game nosedives to 30 FPS for a bit, and shoots back up to 60. It happens constantly. So much so that you could make a drinking game out of it. Don't. It's extremely distracting when it happens. It makes me wonder why they either didn't keep the whole game at 30, or find a way to make the game run smoother. Other than that, still gorgeous. Music is great too. I don't know if the soundtrack beats out A Link to the Past or not, but it's still good in its own right. I think my favorite song in the game is The Ballad of the Windfish, which is pretty much the main theme without being the main Zelda theme. I also love the duet version that Link and Marin have when Link gets his ocarina. This is beautiful. If I had to pick some others, Tall Tall Heights is really good, the Crane game music is boppy, and the music that plays during the 2D section sounds kinda creepy, but still enjoyable. I really wanted to like Link's Awakening more than I did. That's not to say it's a bad game, it's far from it. I love how Link controls, the items are still fun, and the areas, while tiny, are still somewhat enjoyable. Link's Awakening's pacing and lack of distinguishable and fun dungeons is my biggest issue with the final product, and by the time I had reached the 3/4 point, I was wanting the adventure to wrap up, despite it only taking me around 15 hours to complete. The game isn't without charm or character, and I love it for that, but I don't believe this scratched my 2D Zelda itch like A Link to the Past did. It's hard for me not to compare the two, especially since this was considered a follow-up to it back then. To me, Link's Awakening is just a lesser A Link to the Past. But not lesser as in bad. I mean lesser as in just smaller, more tiring, and just not as fun. I can still recommend it if you want more 2D Zelda in your life, but I'd also recommend other 2D Zeldas like Link to the Past and Link Between Worlds before Link's Awakening. You could still pick this game up on the Switch, but I'd probably wait for a holiday sale or something like that. This may be a console Zelda game, but it's a remake of a handheld one, so $60 might be too steep of a price for some. You can still get the original version on the 3DS eShop, so try and grab it before the store closes next year if you want to try it out.
I don't know if it's because of any other personal biases towards other games in the series that prevented me from liking Link's Awakening as much as I did, but I wasn't feeling any of this when I was playing Link to the Past, so it's gotta be something else, right? Well, regardless of whatever it is, I'm ready to move on to the next game in the Zelda Marathon, and these next couple of titles are what made me a bona fide Zelda fan. So we're making the jump to the N64 next time with The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And I'm hoping I can have this review out by Thanksgiving, so I hope you guys have a happy Thanksgiving, and I hope you guys get to spend as much or as little time with your family as you'd like. Make sure to eat all the turkey and ham and whatever other foods you like to partake in. But I need to get going if I want to get the Ocarina of Time video done by Christmas, so I will see you guys then.